Welcome to Trapping Inc.'s Scuttlebutt Podcast. I'm Rich.
I'm Sandi.
And today we are here at the National Trappers Association convention. This is the 59th year for this convention. It's huge. We're in Escanaba, Michigan, and our guest today is Jim Comstock of Comstock Cage Traps. Welcome to the show, Jim.
Nice to be here.
Oh, it's a pleasure. You are going a different direction than most of trapping. You're going completely where you have the choice afterwards with the animal, whether you move it or dispatch it with your cage traps. You've made some remarkable strides and inroads in your products. Some of the stuff that you've talked about, like your power doors, and that we'll get into a little bit later. But give us a background on you. You know, like how you got started in trapping, where you live. We're interested in all these things.
All right. I'm in the foothills of the Adirondacks, Saratoga County. I started trapping in 1966. There was a well-known trapper in our area, Johnny Thorpe, and he lived just up the road about 20 minutes away from where we lived. He was a lure maker, and of course he knew all the big guys, E.J. Daly and Joel Butcher. And so a friend of mine and I, we always used to fish and hunt. And one day we had heard about this trapper up there, and we just decided to take a ride up and see him. And it was like the minute we went in, just looking around, I was kind of mesmerized. You've got animals hanging on the wall, and he was skinning and scraping and stretching furs, and there was animals on the floor. And there was, you know, bobcats and coyotes and otter and fisher and all kinds of things that I'd never seen before, really. And just seeing that for the first time, that's just about all it took.
Well, that's one of the things, too, that a lot of people don't understand, is that New York has an immense variety of fur. Everybody, of course, thinks of New York as the city, right? They don't know about all that wonderful wilderness you actually have.
They don't. In fact, I spent a lot of years traveling on the road for a variety of reasons. I just like to travel, but when I would be asked where I was from, mostly I would just say Vermont. And then I wouldn't have to make any excuses.
So this lit the fire. This started you down the road to trapping.
Absolutely. The only thing about it that was tough, I just remember being in there and smelling all the scrapings and animals and everything. And after about 45 minutes, I just said to my friend Bob, I said, I think I need to duck out for a few minutes.
Yeah.
And but that was the last time that it ever bothered me. After that, it was more or less a comforting thing, you know, smelling the fur shed, you know.
I love walking into my fur shed because a lot of the lures that we use have a very musk, a lot of skunk in them, and that my fur shed smells like that. And I walk in and it's just you just relax, you know. That's
he thinks it's marvelous until he drags it into the garage where my car sits. I don't think it's marvelous then.
I guess there's a place for everything.
Oh, that was very diplomatic of you. So you started in trapping, and that would have been how many years ago?
52 years.
52 years. And back then, what was the main focus? Was it everything?
Actually, yeah, I guess we did. And in those days, there was actually bounties on foxes, bobcats, coyotes, and I think it was $3 to $5 depending on for foxes and $25 for coyotes and bobcats.
That's amazing that there was bounties on things like bobcats and that back then. Huh. So that created a lot of focus on them.
Oh, it did, but only for a few people. I don't think people paid a whole lot of attention to it. I mean, the trappers like Thorpe did, you know, of course. But I mean, they were only getting like $2 and $3 for bobcats and foxes and things. So the $25 and $5 bounties was definitely important.
Big money. It'd be like having a bounty on beaver today. If it was $5, it's more than the beaver's worth.
Just about.
So you started, and I suppose you were classical then, as far as your footholder and your snares and that sort of thing.
Yeah, in New York State, snares aren't legal. So no we're just footholds, and conibears were just beginning to come into their own. I guess they were invented in 1959, I think was the year Frank Conibear made the first ones. And then by then it was the mid to late 60s, and so they were just becoming accepted. And so that's what I learned on the most. But we did trap actually foxes in the summertime for the $3 bounty.
Okay. And so when did the cage trap come into being? What was the motivator there?
For a lot of years, I was a state hopper. I actually went with Johnny Thorpe to Virginia to trap beaver back in the 70s. And actually, we trapped Canada in Quebec.
Really?
Yes. There was a time there it was freelance, and you could get a non-resident license. I was the only province that offered it.
Right.
And now you can't, I don't think you can get it anywhere.
No, we don't even get along with other provinces. So,
Well, that's not true. We get along with other provinces, but there isn't a cross border. Like, we can't get a license in Saskatchewan.
No.
But I was able to trap in Virginia. We got a lot of beaver down there in 3 years, and then a couple years in South Alabama, and then in California, Judy and I went for 8 years trapping bobcats. And then at the end of that time, the cat market had dropped off. And so it was a time to go back home, build a cabin, and settle down, have a family. And after probably a couple of years getting the cabin settled or whatever, I started to do some more beaver trapping and realized that in our area, they were inundated, just overrun. They had closed seasons in areas. And then because they've been closed for so long, when they opened them up, they went from 2 weeks to 6 months because the beaver populations were so high. And I was able to catch nearly 600 beaver in just 18 months around the house.
And the whole problem was, so after being closed for so long, we'd lost out on the whole beaver trapping culture. We'd lost out on the people that would trap, right?
Sure.
They were gone.
Oh, it was great. I had it all on myself. It was beaver on every corner. People were stopping me on the road. And usually when they say, "What are you doing?" you were kind of apprehensive and back off a little bit defensive. And then they would say, "No, we got beaver on our farm. Can you come get them?" I'm like, "Yeah, sure." And then I had, what started the whole nuisance thing was a guy one day just simply said, "I've got a skunk over to my place. You think you can catch him?" I'm like, "Give it a try." And started catching skunks, and then you got woodchucks, and you got squirrels and chipmunks and raccoons. And then it just kept growing. I bought used traps from another trapper who had actually bought some different sizes. He wanted to get smaller ones, so he sold me the bigger ones, which were fine to start with.
Right.
But they were single door, gravity operated, and pan traps. And so that was a bait and wait, we call it. You know, you put the bait out and you just hope you catch something.
Okay.
And it started in that way, and then I didn't like what was out there.
Yeah, with the cage traps.
Right.
So the first innovation that you made on cage traps, was that the walkthrough or the powered doors?
Well, it was like sort of a combination of wire trigger, power doors all at once. And I went actually through a couple of kind of loosely knit partnerships that fizzled out, and actually years were lost. It was kind of unfortunate. And I don't need to go through all that, but what ended up happening, I mean, the first partner I had one day, I said to him, "This will be great when we get the power doors and the wire triggers going." And he said, "We don't need power doors." And as it turns out, that's the essential element that makes it all work. It stabilizes it and makes it function. It wouldn't be what it was without power doors. So the two are almost equal. You need power with the wire trigger.
Right. And the wire trigger, is it more important in the water than on land, or is it equally important?
I guess equal. It's equal. You learn stuff all the time. I mean, I just saw some footage where a raccoon, where the wires weren't placed right, actually stepped over wires that were 6 or 8 inches high in a 9-inch trap. He just like slid over the top of it. And then the next footage was she was bringing the baby raccoons in and just plowed right through it, and of course got caught.
Okay.
Yeah, nothing's 100%, but the wire triggers have certainly changed everything, because then the traps can be set right side up, upside down, sideways, vertically, on land, in water, or underwater.
That is probably the thing that struck me first, was just the fact that you could set it up. I was looking at your trap in one of the stores back home, and It didn't matter whether it was laying on its side or upside down or whatever. It functioned, and because you had those powered doors, it was absolutely foolproof, 100%, and didn't matter what direction it was. Once again,
Very versatile.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
That's what I say is a person wants to use the trap that has the most versatility. And why limit yourself with a single door trap? I mean, you wouldn't take a conibear, for instance, and butt it up against something so the animal could only be caught from one direction if it could be set in a place where it could be caught coming from both ways.
Right.
well, for instance, I mean, your beaver trap is just a monster for success now. But because it is wider than it is tall. I mean, if they happen to be in a tight little canal or whatever, you can toss it on its side and set it in there, and they dive into it. Done deal.
Absolutely.
And nothing's going to interfere. There's nothing sticking out that's going to get caught on anything, right?
Having worked with all kinds of traps over the years, just about everything, I guess. Having a trap that has nothing sticking out beyond the confines of the trap is so important. Not having any trigger mechanisms or anything to hang up on other traps or brush or anything else. There's other traps that have been made that have, elements of the trigger that are on the outside of the trap. Well, a raccoon could simply climb up on it and knock them apart. Bingo, the trap fires.
Yeah. And the way your trigger is set up, I mean, it takes the leverage of your wire trigger to actually set that off. There's nothing that they could be reaching through or grabbing or whatever, unless they happen to be lucky enough to grab one of the wires to actually set it off from the outside.
Right. And what we've done is, at first I noticed that most of the trap manufacturers, or an awful lot of them, made traps with 1x1 mesh. And with that, of course, raccoons, possums, skunks, everything can reach inside. And it wasn't too long, in fact, before we ever actually got fully manufacturing, that we had already switched to 1/2x1.
Right.
And then it makes all the difference.
Yeah. I just it's always the most simple things, it seems, afterwards. Hindsight's always 20/20. But you look at it, just the fact that it was a walk-through situation where both doors are up, and you say to yourself, well, I mean, the animal isn't going to be bothered. It's wire back there, and he knows that. How does he know he can't walk through there? Well, they do know. They do know, and the fact that both ends are open and it looks like it's wide open in a way he can go through there, that's so much more successful, But it looks like such a simple change in the style of a trap, and yet it's such a major difference in how effective it is.
It is amazing how what look to be simple changes have such a dramatic effect.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I said that much longer.
Well, the nice thing is, like you said, you saw the beaver trap in one of the stores in Canada, and that's something to pay attention to because Canada is signatory to a HEDIS.
Yep.
And your trap is certified in Canada, so
Right.
that makes a big deal for Canadian trappers.
Yes. How many different sizes do you make?
Well, there's a 9x11 in the power door traps. There's a 12x12. There's a 12x18. At times I've made custom 12x15s for people. In between, was a fella in Washington, Mike Matney, wanted them for a boat, and he was still catching 40 and 50 pound beaver, no problem, because we still catch those in the 12x12s. And then there was a trapper in the Midwest that was wanting a larger trap just simply because then he has to do no fencing and doesn't have to look for tight runs. So I built him a 24 wide, 15 high beaver trap. I've got a couple of those I use myself too.
Okay, well, you showed me one of your original prototypes there, and it weighed, I think, 45 pounds, you said?
That monster. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, one thing you don't have to worry about is anybody packing it off on you.
Oh, jeez. I say the only thing worse than not making a catch was making a catch.
Yeah, 60-pound beaver in there, and all of a sudden you're over 100 pounds.
It's terrible.
Trying to reef that out of some tight place.
Especially he's live in there. He's not going to be really happy with you either.
You asked about the size of traps too. We do have a chimney trap that's a 5x9 opening that I think we're going to now make a specialized raccoon trap with that in mind. We do have a 6x11 narrow one that a fella named Jared Walker had asked for, and they use them on soffits and tight spots and roofs, and they lay the trap on its side, and you say, gee, you look at it, and you say, what's that for? And the raccoons just blow right through it. It's no problem. Even though it's only 6x11, And I say the chimney's 5x9, and they go right through those. So we already have the components made for the smaller traps, so we're going to do that so I don't have to keep making them all by hand.
So the animal damage control segment of trapping then is your largest customer.
That's all it is.
That's all it is.
Unless I get a call, I don't move. I mean, I'm not an enemy of a fur trapper per se, because if there's beaver or any fur bearers in between where I'm going, I'm basically blinders. I drive A to B, do my job, and then come back. And
right.
I can't say that I've never set a trap for a fur bearer. If I see a really hot set somewhere, I can't take it. But most of the time, it's like I don't have time, to bother with a $5 animal when I can go to another spot and get 75.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So you still do a lot of animal damage control yourself?
Yeah, full time. And that's why it's made it so hard for me lately, because I promise people custom traps, and then I just say, though, when I do promise them, I say I don't have a time frame on it, please, and don't pay me in advance.
You don't hear that one very often from a salesman. Well, but I mean, that goes back to the fact that, trappers are the last defense between civilization and the animals. And in today's world, especially when the consumptive use of things like, fur or deer or whatever is become more and more scrutinized, things like being able to trap these animals and remove them live and transport them or do whatever with them, it is far more palatable to most people, right?
They do like it when you can trap and release. Now, the thing is, where I am, I have to have permission to release any animal. I can't just take it from, 21 Main Street and take it down to 92 Main Street and say, oh, here's a nice spot, I'll just dump it off. I've got to have permission to let
really?
them go. Yes. I can't do it because all I've done is created a problem for somebody else.
It's like government, though. They have to get their finger in everything, don't they?
Yes. And on that same line, too, there are states where you are not able to release anything.
Right.
That even though they're live trapped and humanely trapped in a way that they're not going to be dangerous to people and pets, that it has to be dispatched. Raccoons and skunks, a lot of these are in the rabies vector anyway, and
right.
They don't want disease transferred some other place.
So you must have a couple of very interesting ADC job tales.
One.
I'm sure.
One and only one.
Boy, I guess so. A lot of the problems, we talk back and forth. I have some friends that I talk with on the phone quite a bit about it, and actually they're using our traps too, so we're exchanging information and stories. And a lot of it actually becomes a problem with people as much as wildlife. Mm-hmm. It's a very strange thing, but people call up, and I will talk them out of jobs as often as not. Somebody will say, well, I've got this animal, and I'm like, okay, well, why are you calling me? Well, I thought I should trap it. My neighbor said I should. And I'm like, well, is he doing any damage? Well, not really. I said, well, then why don't we just leave him alone?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I like to feel that if I'm doing something, it's to accomplish something, it's for a purpose. If you've got a squirrel that's chewed in through your soffits and he's chewing up your wiring in the attic and ruining your insulation, yeah, we're going to get rid of that quickly. But, like somebody will have a woodchuck in the yard, and I'll say, well, do you have flowers? No. Do you have a vegetable garden? Well, no. I said, well.
What trouble?
Well, he's not really causing trouble then, is he?
We were just visiting some friends over in lower British Columbia in the Okanagan Valley, and the wasn't woodchuck, it was marmot.
Yeah.
The marmot there ate all his bean plants. He was pretty upset about that.
Oh, that's different.
Yeah.
That's different. Yeah, if they're wrecking your vegetables, the gloves are off.
Yeah.
There's getting to be more of it, though, isn't there?
Oh, tons of it. I've had more woodchucks this year. I'll probably double what I normally do.
And how many woodchucks would you do?
I do 50 or 60 in a year, and I'm up to close to 120 already, and the season's not even close to over.
So are they cyclic then, or is it just...
Well, I think what happens is like almost with beaver. I'll get beaver calls in an area for, say, this year, and I'll go in and I will say, basically eradicate the beavers that are in that one area as a problem. And then while I'm trapping these areas, there's other areas, then they're growing back again. So about the time I get this batch done, next year I'll get a call in a place maybe I haven't trapped in 2 or 3 years, and they've come back, so I trap them there, and it's sort of a rotation.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
I think the same's true with, with woodchucks and stuff.
Where our trap line is in northern Alberta, we have oil companies, of course, on the trap line, and beavers cause a great deal of problem with roads, damming culverts, that kind of stuff. So they pay us to take care of the beaver. And I explained to them that you never really get rid of beaver, that prime habitat is always going to be susceptible to having beavers back. I said it's kind of like beer. You don't really buy it, you just rent it. So we can go get rid of the beavers, but in a year or two, they're back.
Yes. Yeah, they always come back to the same place, the same runs, the same channels, everything. So you can almost go back in the dark and trap them again.
Yeah, yeah. So beaver are a big problem, and woodchuck are a big problem. What other animals do you deal with?
Only a few raccoons, because the rabies epidemic knocked our raccoon population way down.
Oh, you had a big one, did you?
Oh boy, yeah. They were lots of raccoons, and then there were no raccoons.
Really?
And I had them go through my yard with. I always tell people, if you see a raccoon and he's loaded with porcupine quills or he smells like a skunk, kill it. Because what it means is that they're attacking animals because their brain is gone, because they're deteriorating from the disease.
Oh, okay.
And when they attack a porcupine, they don't normally do that, and then they'll have porcupine quills all through them. And if they attack a skunk, they'll get sprayed. And
Right.
with foxes and or coon, the same thing. And they'll tell you that. Now, on the same token, if they call me to come and get that animal, if it's in the yard, I can go get it. But if it's run off, I tell them they probably won't see it again, because then at that point it's haphazard where it's going to go.
Right.
It's liable to show up anywhere, and they'll probably be dead in 10 days.
I guess I wasn't aware. I mean, we don't have raccoons where we live.
Oh.
So I wasn't aware that. I always knew that they were a vector for rabies, but
Yep.
I didn't know that they actually got it themselves.
Oh
that they got
boy!
sick from it.
Oh,
yeah?
yeah. Oh, definitely. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And the foxes, of course, too.
I was aware of fox. Yes.
I wished I'd had my hat cam on a couple of years ago. It would have gone viral. I got a call. A fox had already bitten 2 people.
Oh, wow.
The woman had been bitten, and then it was tree service that bit him on the boot, but it didn't go through. Well, they called me, and the NCON, Environmental Conservation, doesn't do anything with that. They hand it over to private people like myself. So I was going to put my hat cam on and have my potato hook ready, but I thought, I'll just walk over here first, just for a second, and I moved a trash can. And 5 feet away, I hear this growling and snarling, and this gray fox came barreling out. And it was like, whoa, you idiot.
Oh, really?
What have you done? And I am getting rather elderly. So I did get away from the thing without it biting me. It was on me close. And I hooked back and got back to the truck. It was rolling around out in the middle of the grass. So I thought, well, I'll certainly be able to go and dispatch it with my hook here in just a second. I took one step, and he turned just as if somebody had gone, hey, and focused right on me, and then he came barreling right at me, which was fine, because then I'm ready for him. So
Right.
I ended up dispatching him with the potato hook, and then he definitely tested positive for rabies.
Wow.
Yeah, we sent it in. So
Gray
So
fox.
how do you have to handle something like that's obviously sick? So do you have to take special precautions with it, even when it's dead?
Well, it's saliva and the blood that you can get it from. It usually has to come from a bite. And that one there, I just, I've got my long gauntlet beaver gloves, so I just take it and put it in a bucket and then give it to them. I turn it over to the health department, and then they have it tested.
Wow. And the gray fox is something we don't have either. We have lots of red fox,
Yeah.
and cross fox, that kind of stuff. But the gray fox is such a cute little thing. Like,
Oh, they
thinking
are.
of him being rabid is kind of like thinking of a rabid squirrel.
They had actually this year, it was a former nurse that had worked with my wife at the hospital at Glens Falls that was walking on a bike path and was attacked by a rabid coyote last year, just a couple miles from the house. Bit her on the face, on the legs, the arms, and everything.
Oh.
And she and the coyote ended up in the canal together, which probably saved her life. She was afraid if she was going to die. This thing was all over. And I don't know if she pushed it in or threw it in or she jumped in, but they ended up in the canal, and then it separated. And the next day, the NCON came, and One of the lieutenants who was retired had said that he had told the guys that if they split up, they might have a chance at it. If they stayed in a group, it might stay back. So one of them was having lunch separate from the group, and the coyote came in and he killed it.
Wow.
Yeah, but that was like, whew.
Well,
That's pretty scary.
Yeah.
we've had a lot of protests in Canada about beaver and beaver overpopulation. And in Saskatchewan, they put a bounty on them. And so people were shooting them. All I had to do was turn in the tail, and they got, depending on which county they were in, they got $30 for the tail or $25 for the tail. One of the fellows we know tried to start up a contest for whoever gets the most or the biggest or whatever, and all they had to do was turn the beaver over to him. Because how it worked, and this was the way the Saskatchewan government set it up, is that you just cut off the tail, and they were allowed to waste everything else. So all he wanted to do was to create this contest so he would end up with the beavers so that he could take the hides off them and the castor and that kind of stuff, right? The people are already collecting their bounty. And so he got protested by like I forget whatever fur protest group it was, and they got all over him, even though those animals were dying before he came up with the contest. And the one year,
all he was trying to do was utilize them.
he just wanted to utilize them.
Yeah.
The year before, they had paid out on 38,000 or something like that worth of beavers, and this year I think he collected just about 700 beaver.
Wow.
You know, and put them to a good use rather than them just being wasted. You know, it was.
People think they're doing good. You know, they think somehow that, you know, the beavers and the bears and everybody else just lives in the forest and sings kumbaya and they all get together at night and have dinner or something. Like, I don't know what people think, but I think it's the Disneyfication of a lot of animal species that people don't understand what goes on in the wild. So then when something like this comes along, they somehow think that the poor beaver, you know.
They need to go on YouTube and watch the footage of the crocodiles ripping the zebras and wildebeest to pieces in the rivers in Africa.
Mm-hmm.
And we had just about something similar to that in Alberta. We had a beaver control problem going on, and they were controlling them. They had trappers controlling them, and what ended up happening was, once again, people found out about it, protested about it. They pulled it out. Well, now the beavers were very territorial, and there was dogs that got ripped up over it. Like, people take their dog down, throw a stick, the dog goes in the water, and the beaver was attacking them. Whoa. Well, it turned into this whole big explosion, and then the people that wasn't, of course, the people whose dog got hurt that had protested the beaver. It was, you know, but then they end up wanting to sue the city because the city had stopped the control. It was turned into a great big schmozzle. People have no idea what wild animals are capable of.
Oh, yeah, when you see it, I say the actual footage of, you know, lions and hyenas and all those animals, there's even times I have to kind of look away. I'm like, gee, that's kind of rough.
But that's nature.
It is, yeah, and there's so many people that can't handle any part of that, and that's the reality of the planet.
Yes.
That's the way things are.
Yep.
And they basically want to change the order of the universe.
Well, they do, but they have this silly idea that if we all just talk, we can get along. Well, that might be someday possible between sentient beings, like, you know, other humans to humans, but it's never going to be that way between animals.
Probably not between like a lion and a zebra.
Well, even with your dog, the dog either respects you or doesn't respect you. You're either boss or he thinks he's boss, but there's no in between. No. There's no coasting in that world, right?
No.
So when you're doing your animal damage control net, is there a lot of control on trapping in New York?
A whole lot, yes.
There is.
Oh, yeah. I have to keep a logbook of what I catch, where I catch it, when I catch it, name, address, and people of who I trap for, what's caught, and then turn it in at the end of the year. And you cannot get a license the next year until you turn in your logbook.
Okay. But you don't have to have, or do you have training to be a trapper, to get your license?
To become a fur trapper, initially you have to go through a trapper training course, and then to become an animal damage control trapper, you have to take an exam. It's an open book exam. It's like a 2 or 3 hour exam. And I assure you, if you think you're just going to crack open the book and look through the pages to find the answers when you're doing it, if you're not well versed in it, you're not going to pass. You
Okay.
really have to read the book over many times, and then even then when you go to take it, it's like, whoa, there's a lot of questions here.
Well, and that's one of the things that, I mean, education is always the most critical, but it is doing things like that, like being, having some training and being certified to do the job of trapping, that helps insulate us away from the anti saying that we're just savages. We have some training, we have some qualifications. That's important.
I'm definitely all for it. And well, there was things I've been writing articles for the magazine starting back about 40 years ago, and what I would write things about, say, foot traps, for instance. We were just having a discussion the other night about foot traps, and then the claim is, oh, that's those traps that chop their feet off.
Yeah.
And you're like, whoa. I think we need to discuss this a little further. We're not foot trapping. We're trapping the animal. And to catch the animal, I have to hold him. And if he loses an appendage, then I don't have an animal. So I want to do the most humane trapping that I can do, so that I do the least amount of damage, so that the animal is there when I get there. And then also, if you catch one and one's a small one, or it's not colored the way you want to release it, you have that opportunity too.
Right. So what's in the future for Jim Comstock and the Comstock Traps?
More cages.
More cages?
Well, I got lots of ideas.
You do?
Oh, sure. And we just came from the factory in Tomahawk, Wisconsin, that makes our traps, and they're making all sorts of different styles. There was like 3 or 4 sizes of traps they're making in the power door, and then they're making a swing panel trap for us for chipmunks, squirrels, and smaller animals. And now I just turned over a couple of different bobcat traps. We've got 4 different types of doors. They're all powered. All the trigger systems are similar in that they're not pans. And the power door traps were the first with a lock bar. Then the swing panel traps and the squirrel traps were the second. And the third is a bifold door, which folds up again totally inside the trap. They do make a lot of different guillotine door traps all across the country. But if you just go line by line, it's just being pragmatic and logical. When you look at the trap, you study it, the device, and how it works. Well, if you have a big door that sticks up, you're not going to be able to shove it into a culvert.
No.
You have to have a culvert that's at least twice as high as your trap, which is very limiting. You can't set it in shallow water where it's going to freeze in. I'll just throw this in. The Beaver Trap is interesting that even when you set it upside down in a dam break set, we call it, you let a little water trickle through it with one door open, the trap can actually freeze in and still function. And
Right.
so the top level of it will freeze because the trigger's then on the bottom.
Right.
But the bifold door is really neat, because then you can put a cover over the trap. And if you're in a situation where most of us are, where we get snow and ice and rain and it's back and forth, basically the danger in any keeping traps working is 32 degrees. If you're always above it, you're okay, and you're always below it. But when it goes back and forth, freeze thaw, you got problems. You get a little snow, and then it gets up in the mid 30s. It drips a little bit, refreezes. I just remember as a kid setting conibears for Fisher. 1 drop of water onto the trigger, you might as well have welded it.
Yep.
And the Fisher runs up and down the pole, eats all your bait, and the wires are all bent straight.
Yeah.
And he's gone. But with the cage traps, it's the same thing. Just takes a couple of drops of water. So if you got a trap that you can completely cover, now that's gone. And with the bifold door, being that it folds up inside the trap, it's the only trap like that, you don't have that problem. The guillotine door, a little bit of ice will freeze them up. And what I got for feedback, Fred Lawrence, and he had a young partner, Rob, that they set 12 bobcat traps a couple of years ago. And they had 4 of ours set, bifolds, and they had 8 guillotine doors. All 8 of the guillotine door sets froze, and they caught 3 bobcats in our traps. So it made
Really?
believers out of them.
Really?
And those weren't even covered.
Yeah.
It's just with the power and the way they were set up. But you could, I'd say covering's even better.
Well, there are so many places now where the cage trap is the only way you can trap.
Right.
Like Colorado and California,
Massachusetts.
Massachusetts as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's 5 states now that you can't. I think Arizona's another one. and cage traps are all you can use. However, what is heartening now is because of the new traps that we have, it's not a lesser tool, it's a different tool.
Yeah.
And in a lot of ways, it's actually superior to even foot traps and conibears.
Right.
They actually do better.
Well, that's interesting. I've enjoyed our talk today, Jim. And if folks want to know more about you and your ADC, your traps and that, do you have a website they can go to?
ComstockCustomCage.com.
That's simple. ComstockCustomCage.com.
And I do have a blog on there that I just, throw stuff on as I feel like. There's probably, I don't know if there's 150 or 200 posts on it now. And because we are, promoting our product, selling traps, any information that we get that's helpful to anyone trapping, we put on there. So we don't hold back. It isn't like, usually trappers are very secretive and they don't want to share any ideas. But when we go on the different sites, whether it's on Facebook or Trapper Man or whatever, if somebody asks a question, we answer it.
Yeah, that's the only way it can be. We are in a unique situation in that we never claim to be experts, but we do know the experts, and being able to talk to people. We're in such a different medium between the digital and the television, and we like to share those secrets. I mean, it's not like I'm ever going to be trapping on your trap line and you're never going to be trapping on mine, but if we can share that education, it certainly helps us all be better trappers.
Oh, it surely does. But I enjoy helping people. I can't tell you how many positive responses we've gotten from people that have said, "You've increased our business greatly. You've changed our lives. We only use your traps now." And I mean, I'm just totally flattered by it. But at the same token, when we came out with the traps, and it was kind of tongue-in-cheek but truthful, I said, "We've invented the traps. Now you teach us how to use them." Yeah. And people will come up with all sorts of ideas. I just had a guy come to me the other day, and it wasn't even our trap, and he showed me a little thing about a trap that could definitely help in ADC work by catching a whole family group at one time in one trap.
That's remarkable. That's the best part, though, is when you get that feedback, because these are people that are depending on your product.
Oh,
and,
absolutely.
And when you get that kind of feedback and how they're using them, to me, that's a huge form of flattery,
We've always taken every phone call from everybody seriously, and we tell them, I don't want you to just flatter me to tell me, "Oh yeah, your traps are great," or "What are wonderful." I want you to tell me if you've had issues or problems or any kind of circumstances that could affect us or others in the future, so that we can correct it if there's a way to do it.
Well, right on our first shed, there's a sign that says "No Junk Zone," and nothing in there is junk. And though it's everything that's in there has earned its place.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's just no time to be dealing with junk.
No.
Not at all. Well, I think we'll wrap this up here. It's been great talking with you. I appreciate the time you've taken. It's very busy here at the NTA for you. And want to remind everybody that they can find us at our website is trappinginc.com. We are now video direct suppliers for Amazon. You can find us, if you're a member of Amazon Prime, just search Trapping Inc. on Amazon Prime, and you can see all of our shows there, including not only just the first 3 seasons, but the 9 episodes for season 4. And of course, we are always on YouTube. Thank you very much, Jim.
Well, thank you very much for having me.
It's been a pleasure.